Welcome everyone to our, I think this is maybe our 13th or 14th Founders Lunch. So we do this almost every month out of the year, and it's really a way for us to not only showcase the amazing companies and entrepreneurs that are building businesses here in Columbus, Ohio, but also to hear from them what they go through about all different aspects of building their business, how they came up with the idea, how they worked with maybe the initial inventors, how they think about iterating on their product, building a team, accessing capital, building in board governance, and really just the insights behind the scenes of the building of their business. I couldn't be more thrilled today to have Pamela Springer here from ORIS Intel. I have a special place in my heart for Pam because I've actually worked for her not once but twice. I think I was wearing this scarf on my interview for the position at Manta. So it's been a long relationship, but I want to introduce Pam, and let's give a round of applause for her being here today to kick it off. So some of you have probably met Pam before, but for those of you who have not, Pam is a serial entrepreneur, has founded and led multiple companies. She's currently, as I mentioned, the CEO of ORIS Intel, which is a company that Rev1 works with. She is also, in full disclosure, on the Rev1 board, so we get the privilege of having her insights into the entrepreneurial community on a daily basis. But the accolades continue. So she's a veteran executive, more than 20 years of experience growing tech-based companies, including restarts and IPOs. She loves working with innovative growth stage businesses, and later we're going to ask her why does she keep doing it over and over. She's been named to the 13 Powerful Women Running Today's Big Startups, which is a list put out by Business Insider. She helped to build Manta Media into one of the largest, most trafficked websites in the U.S., landing it within Business Insider's Digital 100 World's Most Valuable Private Tech Companies, not 1, 2, but 3 years in a row. She's raised more than $52 million in venture capital and private equity and is very passionate about building best-in-class teams. She's been the recipient of the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award in Technology and the Red Herring Top 100 Award. So with that, I want to start off by letting you talk a little bit about what ORIS is doing and how your work with ORIS came about.
Well, thanks everyone for being here. We'll make this as interactive and productive for you as possible. ORIS Intelligence, we're in the Arena District, and it got started actually it was founded in 2013, but commercially really got ready to go in January of 2015. It was spun out of a company called Revolutions, which is one of the largest, if not the largest, durable medical equipment retailers in the United States. So they sell wheelchairs and medical things online. And at the time in 2010, 2011, there were problems with their channel, and their competitors were going below a price that authorized retailers were not supposed to go below, which is called minimum advertised price, MAP. Minimum advertised price is a policy that typically authorized dealers, authorized sellers sign when they represent a brand, right? Typically a manufacturer's brand. And in this case, Revolutions was maintaining their price, but their competitors were playing games like after 5 or on weekends when nobody was supposedly watching. So the brand said, prove it. So lo and behold, Lisa Stein, the founder of Revolutions and SpinLife, had a team put together basically now the kernel of what we are, to patrol basically and follow and then report on some of our key competitors. Took that report back to the brands and they said, wow, there is proof, thank you. Can we get this on a recurring basis? And then, a little bit later, they were smart enough to spin it out actually with Justin Meats, who was the VP of marketing there at the time, to become the product officer, chief product officer. Justin took that kernel for a year, really worked at it, put a plan together, and I joined him in January of 2015 to now really commercialize it.
Okay, good.
So ultimately what we do is we help brands like some customers are like WeatherTech or Weber Grill, Merrill Shoes, Saucony Shoes, Luxottica like Ray-Ban and Oakley, Mountain Hardware like the apparel company. You got industrial companies like Rheem or Georgia Pacific. They have online sellers that they need to monitor And they need to make sure that the selling price is what it should be, what they agreed upon versus going below. And so first of all, we patrol and monitor that, and then we also find all the unauthorized sellers that are selling their products online. So, that keeps you and I from buying products from unauthorized sellers that can't give good post-sale experience, or they're not even supposed to be selling, so if something goes wrong, there's nobody really to take it back to, which is a very poor reflection on the brand. And what this really does, it enables then the good sellers, the authorized sellers, to preserve that margin. When you and I go into a store, we pick out our phone right away to see if we can find it cheaper online, and if you can, that's actually breakage in the channel. It actually shouldn't do that. This way, if there's price parity, the margin's there for the good sellers, they can advertise, they can educate us. It protects the brand's reputation by not being over-distributed and being commercial, basically commoditized, and having inconsistencies in price. Right, and again, it helps flush those unauthorized sellers out that you and I don't buy from somebody that shouldn't.
Thank you. And we're going to come back to talk more about ORIS Intelligence a little later, but it was good to get that overview. I want to go back in the Wayback Machine, not that way back actually, but learn a little bit about the beginnings of your work in the business world and sort of some of the things that helped to shape you as an entrepreneur and a senior leader now after working with multiple startups. So just tell us a little bit about your background in the early years.
Okay, great. Early years, way back when, my parents immigrated, so I actually spoke German before I spoke English. I was categorized as a slow learner in school because I was thinking in German and I had to translate. So then there was strict guidance from the nuns at the time to to make sure that no more of the German stuff, only speak English because she's getting behind. So I came out. So we recovered from that, I should say, and had a very strong interest in athletics. I was able to, in high school, we did fairly well, and then I got a college scholarship to Oakland University to play on their women's basketball program. It was a great experience. One year we made it to the Final Four, and then we choked. But it was a fabulous thing, and what I did learn there, you kind of reap what you sow. You practice, you have good games, and you have a team, and it's about communication, and it's about being able to do a blind pass, which takes practice, and that was really interesting to me, so that when my first job, while I was looking for my real job, my first job I did door-to-door sales, selling laser prints. These National Geographic beautiful pictures with wooden frames that are stapled in the corner, and I had to go door to door. I had 4 in each hand, and I had to sell 3 of them a day. And so that was my quota. And so you get, it's like, okay, this isn't going to be my forever job, but while I'm looking for a job, I'll do this, and I'll learn something. And so I learned that you got to be able to read people. The lady shows up, you open the door, she's got curlers, she's still in her robe, you're going to show her the kitty, right, or the waterfall, but anyway, it was really perseverance. I had to sell 3 of those a day. Sometimes I did do that phone a friend at the end of the day, like you have to buy 1 in order for me to hit my quota, for me to get paid. But it is, I did learn, for every no you get, you're that much closer to a yes. And I know statistically that's incorrect, but mentally it's very correct. So I did do door to door, and I'll be ever grateful for that experience. And I still have those pictures, some of them in my basement, just to remind me. But really nothing happens till you sell something. So I was right away taken to sales.
Well, that's a really important foundation, as you know, for any company to grow, and starting with the founder. But not everyone has that either personal background, interest in sales, or has had training like you had. So what advice would you give to entrepreneurs or founders who have to start to navigate that and build that internal acumen but don't have the background?
Yeah. Well, the first and foremost thing is, it's before sales, is if you were really going to go pursue something, to make sure that that product market fit is there, right? That what you have is what somebody wants. So, being able to interview people and be able to articulate, the couple, 3 things that your product needs to do for them to adopt it, for them to buy it, is really important. From there, if you need to scale and go from there, and if you don't enjoy sales, you got to figure out either why, because initially you can't hire, obviously, a lot of salespeople. But I would contend, if you stick to the truths of your product, if you stick to your market, your value proposition, you can probably sell it, because hopefully good products, you're helping somebody buy it as opposed to you selling it, right? So hopefully you can go down that path of really fleshing out what it is, what's the value it is, and aligning that in with, people who obviously are interested in how it can help them.
So let's shift gears a little bit back to Manta, where you and I first met. You headed up a very successful transition of the company from one business model, doing white label e-commerce, to a completely different business model, where the company, again, became one of the most trafficked websites. How did you navigate that transition, and what are learnings from that you think other entrepreneurs could think about as they may see a potential pivot in their business plan?
So I joined the predecessor to Manta, which was called EC Next, and when I joined, we had it was a private label e-commerce solution. So we would work with publishers like McGraw-Hill and help them in 2000 and 2004. So when Google was just really getting started, we would take their content, break it up into pieces, and then run and manage their e-commerce piece for them. So we would do the SEO, do the SEM, and then, to the degree somebody bought those pieces of content, we would manage that registration base for them. When I got there, we had 4 of those customers. I came in as VP of sales. We had 12 people, 4 customers, and 6 months of cash left from our VCs. And the goal was really, how do we figure out what the model is, right? And I think this is, as you start to think about what the model is, our business model had a huge upfront payment with very little downstream revenue based on any kind of success metrics. So for instance, we would charge a $100,000 setup fee, a $10,000 maintenance fee, and we would only charge like a 1 or 2 or 3% transaction royalty for everything we would sell. Well, really what happened is as VP of sales, I got direct customer feedback like in 2003 and in 2004. Nobody wanted to spend $100,000 on an e-commerce site. So we broke the model and we said 50-50 rev share, no setup fee. And that actually started to propel the business forward. I became CEO because there was just a situation where we weren't hitting our numbers, and the CEO at the time wasn't for that 50-50 rev share. I should take that back. We hadn't done that yet. So they did a search. They actually put me in the CEO seat. I said, let's go. First thing we're going to do is change the model. And so it started to propel the business. While I'm out on a conference, at a conference, I'm sitting next to a woman from Dun & Bradstreet. She's the VP of third-party sales, and I asked her what she's solving for. And she said, well, I'm just looking for third-party distributors to sell my company credit reports. She said, I just want to hand over these company credit reports, and every quarter just get a check from whatever you sell. I'm like, well, we currently run other people's websites. Why couldn't we just run our own website? And so I said, I'll come back to you. And I went back to our team and I said, what do you guys think? We should just put, something on this platform that runs everybody else's e-commerce, and why not do our own? It was like, yeah. So I called her back and I said, hey, can we become a distributor if we put a site together? And so short scenario here was, 2 months, or we signed a contract, and with actually 2.5 to 3 months later, we launched our site on our same platform that we were running everybody else on, and we had an internal naming contest, and we picked Manta. It didn't mean anything. It was short. It was hard to misspell. And
the hard to misspell is a really, really good guidance, by the way. There's a lot of weirdly spelled, missing vowels, names that...
Or like if you put a number in it, is it the number or is it the spelled out word? So anyway, we weren't going to go with Data Daddy. I knew that was the case.
Mistake the one. I didn't name it.
Oh, sorry. That's right. So we said we're going to go live. It has a thin value proposition. We built out that value proposition after we started listening and learning and iterating. So this is now 2006, 2007, and you know all what happened in 2008 and 2009 with the economy. So ECNext is starting to grow to capture more private label solutions. And this Manta thing, we got a few people working on it, and it starts to get a little bit of traction. We're building out some value. And then all of a sudden it became crystal clear we're in 2 different businesses. In one case, we have this Manta, and it's a digital media website that has company information and a little bit more at the time, but just basically company credit information. And then we have this private label thing. So I brought in 2 investment bankers from New York to a board meeting, and I said, posed to them, well, which business ultimately will be more valuable if you just were going to evaluate it on that? And they were both saying, well, they're both valuable. And it's like, thanks. They didn't do a lot of help that first time in. So as Manta got more traction and you could see really where it was going, you could see the financials. The financials were much stronger. The gross margin was stronger. I mean, the business, if you could prove it could scale, was going to be much stronger than what I'll call a service-based business where we took somebody else's content and on a best case basis have a 50% gross margin, best case. So that's a hard business to really scale. So as we started to get more traction, quite honestly, the idea was we're going to put now all our eggs on the Manta side because we started proving out KPIs that we needed to prove to ourselves that this business was worth investing in. And we also had to convince our venture capitalists that, you invested in EC Next, but we really want to do this Manta thing. And so as we brought them along and they, were asking really good, tough questions as they should, Manta continued to get traffic, the monetization started to kick in, and it was soon time to do one business, not try to do both. And right about the time, 2007, 2008, here comes the recession, and it was like now's the time to focus. And quite honestly, what we needed to do extremely well there, and we had about 30, 35 people, I think, at the time, is the people who are working on EC Next, that they knew that if we move over to this Manta thing, they were still going to have a job. So as you start to transition, one of the key things that we did, we over-communicated to the guys in the boiler room, so to say, like, what you're doing is super critical, it's enabling us to move, and you will, of course, have a job as you move over, but you gotta keep doing this because it's funding Manta, because now here comes '08, nobody's getting any money, and so you had to self-fund Manta's growth through the wind down of EC Next, while Manta ideally, and it did, fortunately offset that transition. So it was a great inflection point, like, you couldn't have drawn it any better, but a lot of it really was over-communicating, trying to that, what I'll call the legacy team, that the shiny team was, recognizing that they were enabling it to happen.
So you talk a lot about that process of the transition and building a good team, and you had to hire dozens and dozens of people as the company grew and new products were added. So talk a little bit about scaling effective teams and some of the things that you learned along the way of how to communicate and scale effective managers.
So the thing I learned pretty quickly is, you cannot just hire for a skill set. Especially early on, and then it even gets reinforced as you grow. As you grow, or early on, it's kind of, you have generalists because you need people to do 3 and 4 things, right? And typically they're all in, they're doing 3 and 4 things. And then as you start to grow, you ask those same people now to only do 1 or 2 things, right? Because you have to have now more focus because the bar has to get higher on performance. And then ultimately, you're only asking them to do 1 thing, but even better than they were doing it before. So the idea that everybody makes that transition is wrong. And so even if, your heart of hearts, they were here from early on, but they're not able to keep up with what the expectations and performance are, you need to do the hard thing but the right thing and figure out an exit for them, a professional exit, of course. So that is one thing you can't overlook and you can't delay. So, and quite honestly, everybody knows it, like at work, that so-and-so isn't either keeping up or a distraction, and the idea that you can reassign them and then reassign them and then reassign them, that doesn't help anybody, and it doesn't help their career by any means. So that's one of the things. As you move from generalist to specialist and you raise the bar, not everybody makes the cut. The second thing I would also reinforce are you can't just hire on skills, you have to hire on values. So values are, well, culture is how work gets done, right? Just kind of how work flows, how work gets done. And values are really the behaviors on how we treat each other when that work is getting done. And you've seen lots of examples of companies that have, values written on their walls and principles and then don't walk the talk. But first and foremost, you've got to hire to values because people always love the culture when it's small, but then as it scales, how do you maintain it? Well, you maintain it because you're really crystal clear on those values. And, for instance, one of our values at Manta was Sherlock. Well, what does Sherlock mean? Sherlock means seek curiosity over skepticism every time. So when I approach you with a question, it's not like, why did you? It's more, help me understand, right? So it's the behaviors that you have to really nail down so you can recognize it, so you can reinforce it. So those are two things I'd point out.
And that, having seen you implement that and help the team come up with what were those core values, was something that was very much embraced and helped us to hire as the company grew. Trust is also something that you feel very strongly about, and you've done a lot of work with Covey and the team on building trust. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of that and how you think about building teams? I know I'm off script a little.
That's okay. Yeah, trust, I think, it's rather obvious, but I like to state the obvious. It's the foundation of your ability to move fast, right? If you don't have trust, it's a trust tax. It's a liability, it slows you down, and ultimately it's indicative of larger issues. One of the things we hear when we start to build companies or are in companies, you could probably reflect on it, it's like, oh, it's bureaucratic or it's political, all these kind of words. And as you start to grow, you have to be very mindful on that. Your senior team, even a small or however, whatever the size of it, has to be each other's first teams. So, for instance, if I'm the VP of sales, I can't have like my sales team be my first team. My executive team has to be my first team. So we have to be able to debate and argue and everything, and then walk out the door unified. Because if we're not unified, everyone can see it, and they're going to throw the bullshit flag when you start to talk about things that you want to get done, because they can see right through it. Also, the thing that happens too is, and then what happens is, if you don't have the ability to have those honest conversations with each other at an executive level, that's really where politics start to happen. It's unresolved issues at the executive level is really politics. The other thing with trust is, as you think about your values, that you've got alignment there and you can kind of talk about those things openly and honestly. The idea that you are hiring A people, which is hopefully what all of us aspire to do. What is an A person? I really believe A people don't need to be managed. A people, you give them guidelines, boundaries, and let them exercise their gifts. B people, if you hire a B person, B people hire C people, right? And that's where bureaucracy happens. That's when things slow down. That's when fiefdoms happen, local optimums happen, because it's really then more about other things versus really the mission or what we're charging for. The thing that I love, and you might have heard this before, but I love this parable of the 3 stone cutters. You have the 3 stone cutters, and you walk up to the first person and you say, well, what are you doing? And he says, I'm laying brick, I'm laying stones, and that's what I'm doing. And you go to the second stone cutter in the same place, well, what are you doing? And they say, I'm trying to become the best stone cutter there is on the planet. And the third person you walk up to, and the stone cutter, and well, what are you doing? Is I'm building a cathedral. All right. So everybody's doing the same job, but they have different perspectives. The I'm building a cathedral is totally tied into the vision, totally tied into the mission. And quite honestly, if you thought you were in the checkers business and now you're moving to play chess, they're going to go right with you, right? The second guy who's trying to become the best stone cutter on the planet, that's a local optimum. These guys are typically the worst managers because it's all about being the best at this. And then the first person who's doing an honest day's labor for an honest day's job for an honest day's labor, you need people like that all day long. So just, as you're thinking about who you're hiring, don't be quick, hire slow, fire fast, right? And quite honestly, the trust piece will eventually erode, and it's not a sustainable if you don't put the time, energy, and effort into it.
I love that parable because I think it speaks so clearly to a concept that we try to work with entrepreneurs on a daily basis, which is that start with why. So not just what you're doing and what you're trying to accomplish with your company, but why your company does what it does and why it's going to be successful at that. So I think that's a really powerful example of that. I want to just cut over to a different but also important topic that I'm sure a lot of people would like to hear about. As I mentioned earlier, you've raised over $50 million in capital during your time as an entrepreneur. What are some of the lessons you've learned about raising capital, whether it would be related to timing or size or partners, that you'd like to share with the entrepreneurs here?
It's easier to do if you have momentum. It's easier, quite honestly, you know, raising money is a challenge. At the same time, if you've got a product or an idea, ideally, if it's that you've turned it into something tangible that more than one person wants. And the more you can show, you know, obviously that you've got a few more customers, the better off you are. If you can delay raising money until you have that, till you can repeat the pattern, I would highly suggest that. You know, your first few customers are never your best customers anyway. You're doing things, you're improvising, you're doing hand puppets, you're doing bubble gum, you're trying to do whatever, right? And you're hitting anything that moves, you're trying to sell whatever. But by this, you know, I don't know, the 10th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, you all of a sudden start to see a pattern. It's like, now I can see what business I'm in. To the degree you raised a lot of money, versus just, you know, little money is one thing, because you got to get sometimes some things going. But if you raise a lot of money early on, that's an expensive learning curve, and now you've got to reset expectation because they bought into this concept, and now maybe it's 17 degrees more to the right or whatever. Though many times early stage money does know that that model evolves, you know, but I would say delay it, because by the time, you have 10 customers, you've got a lot more leverage than you did with 2 customers. You've got a lot of opportunity to potentially to talk more people, and then you can talk about, you know, what the relevant market valuation is. But don't think you right away need money. I would try to get as many things validated, and the first thing you should do is, you know, I give Justin a lot of credit. When we came out with Prowl, which is the name of our product, we focused on 3 or 4 pieces of functionality to get customers on. We didn't build out a robust roadmap. We knew what we wanted to go do, but if it didn't do this, all those extra sizzle wasn't going to matter. So be really rigid and hold yourself accountable to only a few features that propel everything else. But if you can get people to buy on that, you know, on that small feature set, because there's value already there, you're in a good spot.
Well, speaking of getting that customer feedback, and you mentioned it earlier, and I've heard you mention it in the past. I think at one point we talked about, you know, call a customer to every Monday morning. I remember having that conversation. What are things that you do now or that you build into the teamwork now to keep customers close?
Well, within our product, we have a thing called Intercom, which is basically the customer's ability to connect with us 24/7 within the app, and everybody gets the message. At ORIS in terms of when a customer gives us feedback. It could be an issue, it could be, you know, a question, it could be a comment. But so staying close to your customers and seeing their real life data, the real life comment, I think is important. But you know, what we do today, we have like a customer spotlight today. We have one customer through WebEx show us how they use the product, and the whole company attends. Developers, everybody attends and sits through that hour-long WebEx, and the developers, we've taken them out of the back room and put them in the front room, and they can actually ask questions, right? And they actually ask very good questions. We also we meet with lots of customers as we go to different shows. I meet with customers too. While I might be going to a conference of my own or something, and while I'm in Boston or something, I might hit a couple customers. But that interaction before the sale and then after the sale is really important. So we're in the renewal business, so people sign up for a year with us, and then we want them to renew again. If they don't renew, we have a really bad problem, right? And so we have to really be mindful of, okay, when somebody signs up, it's really high and everyone's excited, but 6 to 8 months, 9 months into it, now they know our feature set, and so we better really be thinking about either making that same feature set better or adding to it. But we better know where that customer's problems are, and if we're not close enough to know what the customer's problems are, eventually it's not going to be enough.
So being a serial entrepreneur and continuing to start over in sometimes a new industry, always tech-based, but in a new industry, and learning that industry and making momentum, that can be exhausting. You know, what drives you personally to want to keep doing it, and what do you get out of that?
It's quite a privilege to build a great team. I think that's the best part about my job. It's unbelievable, the people you get to work with, the talent, the different stories. So I just think it's a privilege to be able to do that. And then in the meantime, you're building something. I'm not I don't find as much enjoyment once it's been figured out, just to kind of continue to do it and think incrementally. But boy, there's quite a rush when you drive through some milestones, and then you look around at the people. They're growing, the business is growing, and it's just a rush, right? So it is tiring. Some days aren't always. There's some low job satisfaction days, but for the most part, it can be exhausting, right? I remember interviewing people, and they, what about, this role is exciting. Well, I want to be in a startup environment. I just think it would be exciting. And then as you think about, have they ever exercised those muscles before, doing, a lot of stuff new at the same time? We have a lot of land of the gray, meaning not everything's written down. And it's not black and white by any means. And so is that draining to you, or is that energizing to you, right? Because after about a year of it, you find people who wanted to be in that environment just kind of fade off because it's very draining. So being mindful of what energizes you versus drains you, I think, is critical.
And that, I think, to your point earlier, that really speaks to culture and hiring on values. So if those are things that new team members coming in value, that's more of a fit. If it's like, this does not look like fun, then even in the interview process, they're not going to thrive in that environment. So let's talk a little bit about inclusion and diversity. We know it's a big topic. It's been a big topic for dozens of years, especially in this industry, and given some of the things that have been going on recently. But you've always said, I don't consider myself a woman leader. I don't think about myself in that light. But you are, and obviously you're put often on stage to talk about that. How do you think about building diversity into your team?
Well, even if you take a step back, we just had the Rise of the Rest here, which was a fabulous event. Kudos to Tom and your team. It was unbelievably done, so it was very good. The Midwest, I would almost add, we had to fight that kind of first, like raising $50 million. I mean, we were talking to large venture firms that said, well, you're going to have to move here to the West Coast if you do that. And it was like, why would I do that? So there are things that, as you think about Midwest, and I could tell, I'm not naive, you can tell people who are either comfortable talking to you or not. And it could be for a wide variety of reasons. I choose just to, it's, their problem, not mine. And so I'll just move on. The world's a big place. But, in all sincerity, I think it's a great thing that there has been more attention. I think women own it as well. I really believe that we have to have the confidence to know that we can be, if we're passionate about something, if we have skills on it, go after it, right? And I think that there is some apprehension sometime with, well, if I have family and balance and all this, and being an entrepreneur, quite honestly, you don't have a lot of balance, right? I mean, there's times where there's balance and there's times when there's not. If you have a good team around you, that's when you get balance.
And the trust comes in there as well, right?
Yeah, and the diversity piece is super important because we all have different perspectives, and hopefully we appreciate that as opposed to want everybody to look the same and do the same kind of activities, because you're just going to get a one-sided view of the world. Hopefully you mirror your customers, that that their voice then is represented in your own four walls. Clearly that helps the business. And I don't want to be a broken record. We've all heard those things before. But I personally, if somebody had a problem with it, or if I picked on something, it could be a number of things. But I've always said it's their problem. So I don't.
Not feeling like you have to take it and figure out how to deal with it. You just
right. I didn't own it. I came back to playing basketball. A lot of times I was the only girl playing basketball. A bunch of guys, and I always hear shirts and skins, and you guys are skins. It's like, kind of funny. It's like, no, that's funny. So, but it just came to just, proving yourself. You just make sure you know your own self, what's your own measuring stick. The good news is the world is embracing that even more. I do believe having STEM programs and things like that are only super positive, especially for little kids. I do cringe a little when I hear my neighbors stereotype a little bit. But I also believe that at the end of the day, you own it and you got to kind of run with it.
Well, thank you. I know a lot of people will appreciate your feedback on that. But let's talk a little bit about focus and a couple more questions, then we're going to open it up to you for questions. So be thinking about what you want to ask Pam. But focus can be difficult in a growing company, especially as you're getting different pieces of feedback. You even gave the example of I'm sitting next to somebody randomly and now I build a business around it. You had to do a lot to validate that business, but how do you think about focus and encourage your team to think about what to focus on?
Focus is the hardest thing. If if the one thing that keeps you up at night, it should be, am I working on the right thing? I mean, that is a very hard question.
Tweet that, Shannon. There she is.
No, it's really, it's the one thing that everyone should worry about, because, the world's a dynamic place, it moves, and if you're not really clear on what you're solving for, so like either this year or this quarter, these are the 3 things I'm solving for, and any given activity has to align with that. If it doesn't align with it, you got to park it. And it's hard to do that. It causes, there's a lot of tension there, but at the end of the day, it's whatever you're working on is what your future's about, so you better be very mindful and very picky about how you pick what you're working on. And it should align, honestly, with 2 or 3 things, either for the year, everything's then below the fold, the budget then supports those 3 initiatives, and anything that falls outside it, as black and white as that sounds, you've got to be ruthless on that or replace something, right?
Good input. So we talk a lot about how early stage companies and the growth of those companies clearly gives you energy, but there are also parts about being a leader in a high growth business that are maybe not so commonly known. What are some of the things that are realities of building a high growth business that maybe entrepreneurs looking to get involved, they want to know, right? What are kind of behind the scenes things to think about before you make the leap?
Well, it's a commitment, right? It's a commitment to a big-time entity if you're really going to be all in. And with commitments, there's trade-offs, just like anything. So, be mindful of the trade-offs, whether that be personal, because it should be about a focus. It doesn't mean it has to be, 8 days a week, but it's clearly occupying you pretty much every day. You should try to, sharpen the saw, as Covey likes to say, by, make sure you get some time away, but especially early on, it's very monopolizing. That clearly is something. And then as you start to build, it gets somewhat confusing and challenging, as you figure out what business you're in. You have to have ego maturity, be able to ask people their feedback, and then at the same time, you got to be smart enough to filter out what you keep and what you don't. So did I listen well? Am I really thinking about this the right way? So the ego maturity part, to take feedback, because there are people who have some probably pretty good insights that you could take advantage of to embrace sooner than later. Just because you're doing it doesn't mean you have to do it alone. So that would be a thing. And quite honestly, the other thing that you think you have to grow in increments, like, a lot of times, while there might be big problems to solve, you have to start somewhere, crawl, walk, run. The things that you have to have confidence enough on is you don't always have to think in increments. You can think in step function. So, having the confidence after it's been validated, but to go for it. And then surrounding yourself with not tens of people, but just a couple, 3 people that you can really bounce ideas off on an operating basis as well as a market basis would be really smart. So I guess feedback is something that you should really go and pursue as well.
Wonderful advice to the entrepreneurs in the room. I do want to open it up to all of you to ask questions of Pam, and I think we have wandering microphones here. So, Mr. Walker.
Hey, let's
Your hand up first.
Yeah.
You get to ask the first question.
So, Pam, you and your team are doing an amazing job. You're very humble. You're leading one of the fastest growing startups in the city. So it's something everybody in this audience needs to know. My question is, what are your top 2 items as a CEO for 2018 for the company?
Scaling. I mean, if we can't scale properly, it's and make sure it's solid. So we've actually held back features. We've actually held back accelerating our sales force to make sure the platform can really scale, and we're starting to see that. So scaling is one thing, and then quite honestly, continuing to hire and be picky in hiring select developers and select salespeople, which a lot of them are in Columbus, some of them are remote, and then the challenge there is how do you make those remote people feel very connected and you don't leave them out there on the vine to die. So being mindful that we continue to put programs together to get the remote people as engaged as possible. Those are critical.
Good. Other questions for Pam?
Oh, wait, hold on.
What do you look for in terms of board member participation?
Great. Board member participation. I like to think of the board asking a lot of why questions. The CEO role being the what, this is what we're going to do, and the management team how we're going to do it. So I like the why questions, and those I think are really kind of done from a versus having board members kind of be operators, right? You don't want them figuring things out, but if you can get the why, if you can get the what, and if you can get the how covered, you've got a good setup. Parker, right?
Other questions from the audience?
Hold on, Tina.
Through you to ORIS Intelligence, what about the company brought you in?
So what about the company brought me in? So when I got to ORIS, I was consulting. I had doing other things. I looked at a lot of different things, but what really drew me in were a few things. First of all, they had customers, and most of those customers were referrals. So there was no big active sales campaign. It was just starting. Justin was just starting to do that. Second of all, I didn't even know what MAP, I didn't know what MAP was, and I'm asking these questions, and it was like interesting, so I knew I could learn something, but so the referrals were good. I'd say I had a really solid product person, very solid, technical, and has a lot of integrity. So this guy I could spend all day long with and and I could build around him, so I knew Justin was a key part of that.
Stand up and say hi to everyone.
The other one was, quite honestly, the cap table. The cap table was in a spot where I felt like my energy and efforts and my team's energy and efforts, there was room enough there for us to be rewarded if we did a good job.
Explain what a cap table is from your
Cap
perspective.
table is a capitalization table. That's the ownership, right? As you look at the ownership of the company, how much is left, or if there are provisions in place or commitments are in place already that, based upon an exit, that certain pieces are already spoken for. So it was a very clean cap table, which was very important to me as well to look at. And then, quite honestly, Lisa Stein, who was the founder, she's a strong individual, but she also is very supportive, and she was going to let me do my thing and at the same time be available and be a great sounding board.
Very cool. Other questions?
Yeah, thanks for this. This has been wonderful. So they obviously brought you in to have an impact and do so quickly. How do you come in, because as a non-founder, and decide how to have an impact and where to focus? In your first 90 days, you're probably being judged pretty heavily.
Yeah. Well, the great news was the product was, had already some customers, but it really needed to be commercialized, monetized, messaging needed to be worked on, building a team, and the sequencing of all that had to be sorted out. So, one of the first questions we had to figure out was, when we hire a salesperson, what's the DNA? Do they have to know MAP? Can that be a learned thing? So as you figure out the profile of the kind of people you need. So there's an awful lot to do independent of being a founder, because I was fortunate enough to find this place. I don't know that I'm really the idea person. I think I'm the commercialization person. I mean, I've had a couple ideas, but I really enjoy it. I don't need to start it to enjoy it, to help drive it, but there's plenty to do as you think about, okay, so what ultimately is the goal for this year, and how do we solve for this year without having to worry about the years, what do we need to get done this year to set up the next year? It's really...
Neil?
This is a group here, hopefully, that is able and willing to help you. So what kind of help can we give you? And more specifically, are you looking for customer leads? What would make a good customer lead for ORIS Intelligence?
Rev 1 is great. I mean, I really highly recommend you get engaged, whether you have new ideas to flush it through Concept Academy. There's funding here. There's lots of mentors, there's lots of experience, and they host events like this that hopefully are beneficial to you in some way, shape, or form. Rev 1's an investor in us and have been very helpful in, just whether there be industry contacts or actually there's been a couple, I'm trying to remember, sales lead kind of things, just different exposures that they have. Actually, a big one too was AWS, Amazon Web Services. Through the Rev 1 program, we were notified, hey, they're putting out these programs for startups up to $100,000 credit for a year. So we filled our form out, we sent it in, we got $100,000 AWS credit for a year. So that was pretty good. That was like, woo. So that's that. And from a leads perspective, we really look for companies, brands who have online sellers. Products typically are probably greater than $25 that they sell online, and but we sell directly to brands. We don't sell to retailers. We sell right to the brand. And if you're selling online, you're a prospect for ORIS, quite honestly.
Other questions? Andrea?
So it sounds like you've worked on a lot of really exciting projects through your career. Can you share with us a time where you either were personally, professionally challenged, or feel like you stepped off course of your North Star, or where that happened within a corporate setting?
Sure. So I had just been given the CEO job at EC Next, and the next day was our first board meeting. And
No pressure.
Yeah, one of the board members was on the phone. They dialed in, and they basically said that, great, we're on our third CEO. The CEO had never been a CEO before, and so now they were going to basically write off the investment. So that was a big vote of confidence right out of the gate. So that was good. So we ended up buying their shares back for actually a nickel on the dollar. But that was like, okay, great. So that was, one of the first ones. But we also had, quite honestly, I think the hardest thing to do is when you have to riff people. That's just something you never, ever want to do again, and which I had to do. Had to get rid of 9 people because we had gone too fast, and then we hit a rut, and we didn't have enough wiggle room. And so as we were going through that rut, we had to lower our expense base because the revenue went right down with it. And it was going to be a bit to fix it, and that was just the worst thing ever, right? And you're messing with people's lives, and you should learn a lot from that as you think about making sure you're not building on sand, and we didn't think we were, but lo and behold, it wasn't as sustainable as we thought. So, that's a really hard thing to do. I think there are things that, happen that are just disappointing, whether a customer doesn't renew, or you don't get the candidate that you thought was going to be right, or as you think about, different dynamics that happen that are just disappointing, like we should have known better, kind of thing. So, there's a lot of those kind of moments, and the good news though is, and it's okay to experience them, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of upside, and as you come out of things, you look around, you also learn who ducked, as you go through something. Like last May, we went through a transition at ORIS from an existing technology provider, and we did the Big Bang Theory. We did this cutover, right? And so we did this cutover, and when we did it, it didn't go well. It didn't go. It was like chop, chop, chop. And I had to have all the salespeople stop selling, become black belt account managers, be all over customers, be very transparent that we're having issues, data issues in these certain areas, and just be on it. It was the worst June and July last year ever, right? But then you also saw us come out of it, and you saw who ducked, and that most didn't duck. And we were better now for it. And our customers actually appreciated it.
The transparency.
The transparency, yeah.
Oh, that's really good. Couple more questions in the back row.
Yeah.
She's running.
So as your company is growing, you always want to have the funding and do more work. So, you can always find a contractor to do that. But you can always also argue that you want your own staff to develop the capability. So my question is, how do you make that decision? What type of work you want to contracting out? What type of work you want to get it done in-house?
If it's core and critical, and if it's an IP, if it has to do with IP, and that's going to be the asset that either is going to continue on forever or drive the value, you would probably want to own that, right? As you think about ancillary pieces around the sides that are more interchangeable, those you could probably outsource. But the core has to be owned if that's going to really be the baseline foundation of what the building blocks are on and potentially where the valuation's created. You want to keep that close.
When you were 22, did you see yourself becoming an entrepreneur? And are you surprised by the path your career has taken?
When I was 22, no, but what I did like about sales was I felt like it was my own business because it was my own territory. And it was my territory, and I reaped what I sowed. I could work all day. I could work, do whatever, make calls, do my presentations, all that kind of stuff. I kind of control that. So I kind of felt it was my own business, and I really, really enjoyed that. That I could say that I was going to be a CEO, no, but I knew that I really enjoyed that a lot of times, that I could draw a direct correlation between effort and hopefully some intelligence and results, and I gravitated to that. So that was something I wanted to make sure I was always in, something I could control like that.
If there are no more questions, I think we will wrap it up. Let's give Pam a big round of applause for taking her time today.